So let's start with your name and which press you're involved with.
Hi, I am Vincent van Gerven Oei. I am co-director of open access, scholar-led, and query-led press Punctum Books, based in Santa Barbara, California.
Great. And so when did you start using Thoth? What did you use before Thoth? Did you have a metadata management service?
Yeah, not a service. I mean, we had Excel and Google Sheets, and
Okay.
we had a giant spreadsheet. And I think that's how most of us small presses did it before Thoth. Is we had a giant spreadsheet, and then depending on your spreadsheet wizardry skills, you would be able to export those metadata into other formats semi-automatically that you would then have to upload to different repositories. So like I had a spreadsheet, a master spreadsheet, and then I had a separate spreadsheet with different columns for uploading stuff to OPEN. So we would actually send them an Excel sheet with data. And then the same for Muse. And so you had different spreadsheets for different repositories, and you constantly had to copy paste data in different ways and then format it differently. And there was a lot of manual labor.
Yeah, it seems like it takes a lot of time.
It takes a lot of time. It is enormously error prone because it's all humans copying and pasting things and putting stuff in manually. And it didn't serve most of the, automatic ingest features that these repositories have. We weren't able to generate any of the output formats that were not Excel or CSV, which showed no Onyx, definitely not any of the other flavors. So yeah, that really limits your reach, and it limits the dissemination of your publications. So you may be open access, but that doesn't mean that you're discoverable, right? And you really need these types of different output formats and really need to be present in these different repositories in order to reach, a maximum audience, so to say.
And so how big was your catalog before you switched over? What was the migration process like from Excel to Thoth? Was it kind of a big push? Because I mean, Punctum has a pretty big catalog.
Yeah,
and
I
I
think
know
at
that's
that time,
yeah.
I think at that time we had 300 books. I think the period in which we were using both systems in parallel, because Punctum was involved in the development of Thoth, right? So we were basically together with open book publishers, we were its first users. And so we have seen Thoth 0.1.
Yeah.
Right. So we were basically able to ingest our metadata wholesale because Thoth was built on the way that OBP, initially at least, organized, OBP and Punctum organized their metadata. So since we were involved in the data structure, it was, let's say, for us, it was an organic transition, in the sense that we didn't really have to adapt to the structure of Thoth because that structure was something we were familiar with. It's just like in Excel. Obviously, it involved a lot of data cleanup on our side. So there was, thanks to our collaboration with UCSB Library, we're able to do a lot of that work together with librarians and library assistants and interns in the university library. Generating bisect code, generating all kinds of different identifiers for different books. At some point, they helped us create DOIs for all the back catalog. So like a lot of labor was done by people from the library, for which we're enormously grateful. I don't think we could have made this switch without help from the library. Sherry Barnes, who was our contact person at that time at the UCSB library, has been completely instrumental in helping us develop this, and also instrumental in envisioning Thoth as a viable solution for open access presses. And she has been part also in the beginning from COPIM until her retirement a few years ago. So that actually made it rather smooth. Initially, Thoth didn't have capacity of ingesting chapters, so that's something we've only done very recently. And as a result, there were some gaps. So like you would have old metadata that was automatically ingested into Thoth from the spreadsheet, but at some point we stopped updating the spreadsheet, but continued with Thoth, but then didn't have the chapter data. So we had to do some, and you were involved in this.
Yeah, that's true.
We had to do some, metadata labor to generate all of these chapter metadata files, which was a little bit of work. But overall, I think that because I am pretty anal about keeping good records for these types of things, we were in pretty good shape when we started. I think there were very few gaps. For example, one thing I'm finding out now is that we're outputting Onyx metadata files for Google Books, because that's something we've recently added. And so Google Books has a very, particular ingest system. But they require bisect codes, which is a very antiquated way of categorizing books. I mean, the categories are really absolutely insane. It's like as if you're looking at 1960s encyclopedias, but then encyclopedias of one volume. Right? I mean, it's like it's this ridiculous like organization of knowledge in which you have like history, American history, and English history. Those are your historical. And you're just like, and since most of our books are like cross-disciplinary or transdisciplinary,
yeah, that's difficult.
In any case, so like we didn't generate bisect codes for a lot of our earlier publications because none of the platforms required them. OAPN requires BICs. I think the JSTOR requires simply keywords. Anyhow, no one ever asked for bisects except for Amazon. And so now we have to back generate these.
Okay.
So that's a little task I'm giving myself in free time. But that's just refinement, I would say. Refinement of your data, making them more complete, and making sure that your data is as compatible as possible with as many output formats as possible. And that's also something we're working on with Thoth right now, is that actually the record, each record file, so to say, would give you an indication of like, this record is currently complete for this, that, and that repository, but it's incomplete for that repository. And so to give you an indication of like, okay, how much more do I need to add in order to be like Google Books,
right?
Google Books compliant, or JSTOR compliant, or OAPN or DOB compliant, right? Because again, that's a lot of knowledge that you otherwise would need to gather haphazardly or simply by trial and error, right? I didn't know that Google Books didn't wanted bisect. They never indicated that anywhere, but at some point just a red flag, because it was like, we need this bisect, otherwise we cannot, and so on.
It seems like you learned a lot throughout the development of Thoth, just about what things you need that you didn't know. So what would you recommend for publishers interested in joining? Like, I feel like it could be a little bit intimidating. You only have so many books per year, and like, what can Thoth offer that you would find helpful?
What is intimidating is the landscape, actually. And the landscape, because of its opacity, right? The opacity of these repositories, in many ways, the way in which they ingest data, in which they process data, the requirements, many times they are not even that sure of the requirements themselves, right? So yeah, we accept Onyx 3.0, but we, oh yeah, but you need to have that field. It's like, that's nowhere in your requirements. It's like, yes, but we do need it, otherwise the whole thing breaks, right? So we imagine always these repositories as these giant institutions that have everything in order, but usually these are also like just simply, bare bones software frameworks run by like 2.5 people. So, in that sense, the landscape is intimidating. And I think the way that what Thoth makes easier is that we already did a lot of the trial error research for you, right? There is a huge wiki that is residing on our GitHub, which has compiled, which is a compilation of all the research that we put into, figuring out what do you actually need as an OA publisher to put into a metadata record in order to make it compatible with all these different platforms. And I'm sure other people have done that research, but we are really the only ones that actually have made it fully public, right?
Definitely, yeah.
And we're constantly updating it. So I think that really speaks for the project. Like we are really trying to make not only the software open source, made for open access publishers, but also the entire process behind it. As much as possible, we try to make it open. Code is on GitHub. We have this giant wiki that lists, I mean, a gazillion different other output formats that we still don't have. And so we obviously try to prioritize those that are most frequently used and that actually abide by open standards. So BISEC is definitely not an open standard. It's owned by the American Association of Publishers. I mean, it's some type of ridiculously old-fashioned institution that somehow has copyright over a series of keywords. I mean, these are really ridiculous institutions, actually. Like that, they the ASG, I think. I don't even know what it stands for. Anyhow, it's not very important. So Thoth may be intimidating, but it is much less intimidating than actually doing all the work yourself.
Well, and people at Thoth can help. You know, I think that's part of it. Is like we're very open to answering any questions. Like I know that we frequently meet with publishers to check in, see where they're at, any questions, because this can be new for everyone. But okay, so what is my next question? My next question is related to any other feature, or can you think of like any other unexpected knowledge that you gained from the transition to Thoth and how it assists your publication? I'm thinking of one example in particular just because I've helped out on it, but specifically library outreach. I mean, going into Thoth, this is something that was we didn't know that we would be able to get author affiliation from each chapter, and now doing outreach, we can approach university libraries and let them know, hey, we published these authors from this system, where it seems like otherwise with an Excel sheet that would have been extremely difficult. Have there been any other situations like that where you've been met with like this happy surprise and how Thoth has been able to help you in ways you didn't expect?
Well, I think the library outreach is obviously a good example of like of using the power of the system to sort through this. I mean, the amount of data actually is gigantic. I mean, it's because it's, each author and book, they all have abstracts and you can sort. I mean, it's like there is a lot of data about our catalog in Thoth, much more than is on our website. And so the power in the way that you can sort through this data through the different APIs and export those data in all kinds of different formats and in different ways of organizing, definitely helps us to gain a lot more reflexive insight into what our catalog is. And as I said, as you already indicated, library outreach is one example of that. For me personally, I've only started to understand the enormous complexity of the metadata landscape because of working on Thoth. The absolutely ridiculous infrastructure that has developed over time, the formats, the different identifiers for all kinds of aspects of a book, organization, institution, author, subject matter. I mean, there are all kinds of different identifiers that have tried to rationalize, in one way or the other, these enormous amounts of data that are otherwise would just be, strings of letters. For me, as a philosopher, as somebody who has a degree in philosophy, that is, of course, a slightly amusing state of affairs in the sense that that it speaks of a certain level of idealism that at least philosophy has long abandoned, or at least the philosophy that I abide to, has long abandoned. And there is this fantastic text by Deleuze. I think it's in his preface to work by Foucault, where he talks about a Chinese encyclopedia, which is of course horribly orientalistic, which contains everything from objects belonging to the emperor to things organized alphabetically and frogs, right? So like these completely heterogeneous ways of organizing. And it seems that we're still there, right? We're still like in, Chinese encyclopedia land when we try to organize and sort through book metadata, like everything from orchids to DOIs. All of these things are utterly redundant, useless. No, I mean, try to solve for things that are, like orchids. Yeah, we have a unique identifier for everyone. Yeah, but you can also, make multiple orchids for yourself because there's no central authority. So like that already is failing. DOIs will have a single digital identifier for every single publication. Oh yeah, but like I can make multiple DOIs for a single publication. I can assign a DOI to specific, to no matter what layer of the object. So like, okay, that's also out of the window. Subject categorization, like we now have thema categorization, which is really, really beautifully fine-grained, but you need, a PhD in encyclopedia knowledge somehow to find I mean, the same thing is with Library of Congress subject headings. I mean, these systems are so complicated that they hardly make things better. And so I find this always so terribly amusing. It's like, I mean, I'm always happy, when it's an open standard and we can just integrate it into Thoth. And I would be happy to, facilitate the next fad in organizing book metadata. But that's what it is. It's a fad. It's never really a solution. It is never much better than an actual human librarian that has knowledge of a field, in-depth knowledge of a field, its history, and its authors. It's never better than a publisher that knows their catalog, not on the basis of keywords, but on the basis of actually producing it. And I think that human aspect, which I think is essential, like no matter what data-driven knowledge you may be able to generate, it will remain central, right? Of course, Thoth can be used to extract wonderful trends and wonderful sets of data from the books that we publish, but it's still of marginal interest compared to the actual book itself.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm a publisher. So I'm sorry, I completely
no, I love this ramble actually. This is such a great tangent. I'm kind of glad it went here because we talked about some of the practical aspects of Thoth, but then just looking at the system as a whole, like, because also Thoth seems like it will always be evolving. It will always be evolving in response to the publisher and the librarian. And you actually, you talked about, it will never be, the system will never be as good as like the individual librarian working with the collections. But I think it's a really important aspect to mention that Thoth was also developed by librarians. As you mentioned, Sherry Barnes was involved. So that will always be, helpful for Thoth's development, no matter.
No, I mean, Thoth resides, Thoth resides in the middle, right? Somehow, like it operates at this juncture between repositories, libraries, and publishers, and it can grow in these three directions, both in terms of the way that it is integrated with these different systems that operate on all these three in all these three fields, but also in the way that it can interconnect them, right? And there's a lot of potential for Thoth to be a component in any of these three, a core component in any of these three areas, from the basis of another type of repository to, as OBP has done, the core of a website, and also like the Open Book Collective, right? Thoth is the core of this website. It contains, or it provides most of the data that is represented in the OBC catalog. At the same time, I really think that Thoth can become potentially the basis of a universal library cataloging infrastructure. It has that capacity to deal with those amounts of data. It's a question of ingest, how to get the data in there and how to collectively manage those data. But it is clear to me that we really need to move away from, private enterprises providing mediocre metadata to everybody and asking money for it.
Yeah.
That's just really, that should just stop. I really believe that Thoth as open infrastructure is, I would say that it is really true to the way that also Punctum believes publishing or scholarly publishing should operate, which is community owned, community managed, open source, without a profit aim. I think that would be the only way to keep this system alive, in fact, alive and generating the quality of research that it still seems to be generating. But I have no idea for how long, and I'm rather pessimistic about the future of academia in general. So if we want to think of academic survival, then we will need to think about open infrastructure, and Thoth is just a very small part of that.
Wow, I couldn't have asked for a better interview. You went everywhere I wanted to go without me needing to ask the question, which is great. So I think we'll just end on that note. I feel like you brought so many useful, interesting things into the conversation. I think it's going to be hard for other people to live up to this interview, Vincent. But we'll see.
No, I mean, Thoth is an idealistic project. I mean, of course, it is very practical, right? And we use it practically. But I think the idea behind it, or at least my idea behind Thoth, is that of universal catalog. And that's where I wanted to go eventually. I do not believe in the monopoly of OCLC on metadata. I do not believe that it makes any sense that everybody is privately ingesting metadata into their private commercial systems for which they pay ridiculous amounts of money and which actually don't really work very well.
That's true.
I mean, every library is paying massive amounts of money for like what is basically a broken infrastructure chain. And like, why would we want to do that? Well, the only reason is because we're basically captured by these systems, and it is enormously expensive to change. How can we make it cheap to change, right? How can we facilitate a transfer of data that is cheap? Well, that's still a very long way ahead. But if we can somehow find a way to lower the costs for those who have significantly bought into commercial systems, to like, if we can lower that cost to nearly zero to transfer to Thoth, then everybody will do it. I think we can do that already with open access publishers. I think that the cost of transitioning to Thoth is currently pretty close to zero, in the sense that we help with everything, and at some point we may charge some like random fee for helping you ingest your catalog. But if you have like 10 books in your small open access publisher, like
it's not a problem.
Do that. Yeah. Right. So like that's why it's attractive. But for a library to transition its entire catalog, the thing is that once you have one academic library, then everything becomes it becomes like exponentially easier, right? Or what, not exponentially, logarithmically, whatever.
Well,
one of these two, right? But like in the beginning,
and it also always comes with a hand motion.
Right. So this is like, no, this is exponential. This is logarithmic, right? It becomes logarithmically easier in the sense that the first ones will be the most difficult ones because they have to, enter their entire catalog. But as you expand your base catalog, then more and more duplication will take place, and so like it should technically be easier. So we have a large staff of librarians that work with Thoth and that work on, data refinement and,
Well, I mean, and that's why we have another part of we have hopefully some more time to work on that. I know that we have a lot of future Thoth plans. We just have to convince librarians to try it out.
No, I
But
mean, I mean, they're usually very enthusiastic about it, but very
that's true.
pessimistic about actually involve. I mean, librarians completely see the potential of the thing. The problem is like how to sell this to, you know, your provost or whatever you have, you know, above you in these Byzantine university structures, right? Because until I worked with Thoth, I had very little understanding of the importance of metadata. And now it feels like this is the most important thing in publishing, but of course it's not, right?
Well, infrastructure is huge. I mean, I think that's where the conversation's going. And I mean, this is another tangent, but I think Thoth is crucial because it's open. And I mean,
yes,
like
but you know what we also need. I mean, we also then need like, you know, open patents for POD printers. You know, why are these things patented? Like these
true,
right? Like, can we invent a POD printer that you can actually, you know, print at home from, like, how do you call these 3D printers? Like a 3D printed POD printer, like, you know, with an open schema that you can just download from wherever, and you just, you know, you print your own POD printer. You know, these types of things, your own homemade. These actually already exist, like Book Scanner. Like,
yeah.
we need open products at the end also, like open, not just digital infrastructure that is open source, but we need actual physical machines that make books that are available to as many people as possible, right? And like an open source copy printer or something like that.
That could be another project.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I will be the first one that wants to move away from like this crazy Amazon, you know, Amazon Ingram duopoly of POD printing. But you know, what does it even look like? You know, how do you think about distribution networks in a sustainable way that are not driven by, you know, these massive warehouses? I mean, these are really enormous problems. Like at the end of the day, if you do not want to abandon print, which we do not want to abandon print.
Yeah.
I believe in print. Print is the best. I mean, no one is going to sell me a PDF ever. I mean, why would you even? I mean, open access is logical because no one wants to pay for a PDF. Like this,
Exactly.
this is like, it is an absurd proposition. Like it's a stupid set of bits and bytes on some silicon, you know, silicon substrate. So I want paper. So the question is how to think of that as being more open than it currently is. Anyhow, this is
yeah. So I have something embarrassing to admit. I do not have an upgraded Zoom account, and so it's yelling at me. So we're going to. I mean, I think we got enough content there, to be honest with you.
Yeah.